There's much we don't know about the microbiome. For example, why do animals have a microbiome at all? If our microbiomes are so crucial for health, why do patients who've had their colons removed go on to live full and healthy lives? Which animals don't have microbiomes? What do they do instead? And why didn't humans follow their path? And finally, what makes a good microbiome? And what's the easiest thing we can do to improve ours? Today in the Venkat Files, we try to answer these questions and more. Before we do, let's be specific. Today we're talking about the gut microbiome, the colony of organisms that inhabits the colon, the last 1.5 meters or 5 feet of a tube stretching from mouth to anus. Different colonies reside on the skin and in the mouth and other body cavities. They are highly influential in their own right and are worthy of their own program on the Venkat Files. But the colonic residents are by far the biggest group, amounting to trillions of bacteria, together weighing the same as a brick. To give context to what these organisms do, we should really take a short walk through the digestive system. When you consume a spoonful of food, enzymes in saliva start to break down carbohydrates. A quick swallow passes the food down the esophagus and into the stomach, which is a fist-sized, cashew-nut-shaped hollow. For a few hours, it digests and absorbs proteins and grinds the food down to pieces smaller than a grain of rice. From there, the food enters the small intestine, which is as long as a medium-sized truck and about the width of a plumber's pipe. It takes care of fats, vitamins, minerals, and water, and it also mops up any carbohydrates and proteins left over from the stomach. It's at this point, when the food is reduced to a quarter of its original volume, that all the mystery begins, when it enters the colon. The colon is about the length of a park bench, and at around twice the width of the small intestine, food lingers here for a good day or two, during which time it gets formed into this familiar sausage-shaped waste we all laughed about as children. It has many of the same functions as the small intestine. It absorbs water, it absorbs the same vitamins, and it absorbs the same minerals that the small intestine does. So on the face of it, it seems like most of what the colon does is fulfilled fairly well by the small intestine and stomach. Which brings us to the first question. Why did we evolve to have a colon full of bacteria when most of its functions could be carried out by having a longer small intestine? Why take the risk of carrying bacteria around that could leak through the bowel wall into the bloodstream and cause infections and immune reactions that can harm the host? As it happens, some animals did do away with their colonic microbiome, and we'll get to these later. But for now, let's look at why those that have them do so. For animals that are vegetarian, their food chemically is hard to digest. All the nutrients are packed away behind walls of cellulose. One way to reach these nutrients is to let bacteria break open the cell walls for you using their own chemicals. And if you have the right bacteria breaking down the plant cell walls, you could live off nothing but tough vegetable matter, which many animals do. And the fibers left over after the nutrients were removed higher up the digestive tract can now nourish the bacteria, which convert them into something very special: short-chain fatty acids. These are not only useful for energy, as they can be absorbed through the bowel wall, but they also protect the bowel wall from the bacteria themselves. As it happens, plants don't really want to be eaten, and they've developed all kinds of nasty toxins to put animals off from eating them. For some colonic bacteria, these toxins are a favourite food. They break them down into simpler molecules that the animal's liver can harmlessly eliminate. So you can see that if you're a herbivore, having a colonic microbiome lets you eat a wider range of foods than you might otherwise. You can break down toxins and digest tough fibers. And this explains why people who've had their colons removed can still live normal lives. In the modern world, we can avoid foods that are rich in fiber or laced with toxins, while in the wild this would be very, very difficult. It also explains why people on the carnivore diet, eating only meat and supplements, don't seem to experience any short-term harm. By eating no vegetables, they bypass the need to digest fibers and toxins. In their bowels, bacteria that can digest fibers and toxins fall in number, and ones that prefer meat thrive. We'll return to this later. For the rest of us, having thousands of different microbiomes in the gut means that if your food availability changes, you'll still be fine. There's likely to be something in your gut that can handle any new food. This comes in useful when seasons change and bring in new foods. And if you need to migrate to avoid bad weather or hostile neighbours, you can still digest whatever you find. If you have just one or a few species of microbes in the gut, you'll be limited in what you can eat. Koalas, for example, eat nothing but eucalyptus, and they have only a few types of bacteria in their guts. If their preferred species of eucalyptus is no longer available, they have to wait until the balance of gut bacteria redistributes in favor of those that can digest the new species. Most herbivores eat all kinds of different plant foods and have wide diversity in their gut microbiomes. If you're a carnivore, on the other hand, your energy comes not from tough plant material, but from soft, easily digested proteins and fats from other animals, so you only need a short length of gut. Your microbiome will be much more focused, with fewer species living in it. But here's a rarely discussed finding. The microbiomes of different herbivores, giraffes and zebras for example, are broadly similar. Carnivores, on the other hand, even of the same species, can have very, very different microbiomes. Why is that? It could be because more types of bacteria can break down meat, so a carnivore can get away with having any of them in its gut. So long as the bacteria can make short-chain fatty acids out of amino acids and proteins, it's good to go. With plants being so tough, it generally takes specialist bacteria to break down plant cellulose and deal with all the different toxins, and you'll need many different species of specialists to break down the different fibers you encounter. As you can see, some bacteria make short-chain fatty acids out of fibers, while others make them out of amino acids. This seems to be what distinguishes the microbiome of the carnivore from that of the herbivore. Omnivores, not surprisingly, have both. Like everything else in nature, there are exceptions to the rule. Pandas, who spend most of their lives eating nothing but bamboo, have microbiomes that are more similar to carnivores than herbivores, and with much less diversity. Why that is, nobody knows. Nearly all mammals have a strong relationship with their gut microbiome. Bats are an important exception. They have microbiomes more similar to birds than to other mammals. Birds and bats share in common their ability to fly, and flying animals have a weight limit that puts a ceiling on the amount of food they can eat at one sitting. If they overeat, they won't be able to escape from predators. This makes a heavy gut microbiome a luxury they can't afford. Birds and bats prefer to spend their weight quota on food. Most caterpillars don't have microbiomes at all, which is odd given how much vegetable matter they consume. You'd think that a population of bacteria to help the digestive process might help the caterpillar grow faster, but because most caterpillars can only eat one type of plant, and indeed spend their lives on just one plant, they have no need for a diverse microbiome. And of course, when the time comes to metamorphose, having bacteria inside the chrysalis, while it turns into a soup of rearranging tissues, could pose a serious infection risk. The same may hold true for bee larvae. They too lack the well-developed microbiomes of the adult bees. And roughly 2/3 of ant species that have been studied in some parts of the world lack a microbiome, for reasons unknown. Apart from toxins, the environment teems with dangerous bacteria. Some can make you seriously ill, and you have a better chance of fending them off if you have an army of your own bacteria waiting to receive them. We've seen now how there are advantages to having a microbiome, deriving energy from short-chain fatty acids, squeezed out of indigestible fibers, protection from toxins, and a personal army of microorganisms that like nothing better than eating enemy bacteria. We've also seen that if you need to, you can evolve to get by without a microbiome. Humans can survive in the modern world without their colon. Having a colon without a microbiome, however, is a disaster. The bowel wall gets infected with anything that gets there from the food you eat. Without the microbiome, these bacteria will invade unhindered. These are the advantages that are most obvious and predictable. There are other, more unexpected advantages that are harder to explain. We'll get to these soon. But first, let's discuss the disadvantages, not least of which is having to protect yourself from invasion from the microbiome itself. We do this with a very thin layer of mucous membrane that separates the bacteria from our internal organs. On the correct diet, the short-chain fatty acids that the microbiome produces keeps the lining of the colon intact. When it stops functioning, we end up leaching small numbers of bacteria through the membrane and into the bloodstream. Our immune systems, which are on high alert for new bacteria, mount an attack and make a whole clone of immune cells against the bacterium. Long after the bacteria are gone, these immune cells lie waiting to attack again if there is ever another breach. Unfortunately, these cells sometimes forget who it is that they're targeting, and long after the bacterium has been dealt with, they target harmless parts of the body, like for example the greasy covering that envelops nerves. Damaging nerves in this way leads to many peculiar symptoms and even disability. The symptoms taken together make up the condition called MS, multiple sclerosis. When other parts of the body are targeted, other conditions come about: lupus or SLE, thyroid disease, and many other autoimmune conditions. Finding ways to keep the gut lining intact is a major goal in avoiding autoimmune disease. We'll cover some useful strategies at the end of the video. Over the course of our evolution, the microbiomes developed other functions that helped their human hosts. It is of course in a bacterium's best interest that its host survives to see another day. And here's where the functions of the microbiome become very strange indeed. It seems that having a wide diversity of gut bacteria helps to prevent infections at sites distant from the gut, like colds and coughs, and even wound infections. How the bacteria manage to exert an influence on distant parts of the body is a mystery. Presumably, they produce compounds that, when absorbed, interact with the wider immune system. This is a benefit that could only come about if the gut microbiome and we evolved together. Partnerships like this abound in nature, and not just in the animal kingdom. Fungi partner with algae to form lichens. They also partner with trees to share nutrients. Bees form partnerships with flowers, and grasses form partnerships with humans, giving us an endless supply of grain in return for our help in looking after them and helping them survive. In none of these relationships is it clear which partner is the puppet and which is the puppet master. It's not outside the realm of possibility, then, that the colonic microbiome manipulates us to seek foods that it prefers, and that in return for these foods, it confers survival benefits not only with the short-chain fatty acids, but with protection from infection. Like ants protecting their aphids, the microbiomes may be protecting their assets, us. Sometimes things do go wrong. If you're a sugar addict or know someone who is, you'll know that your main preoccupation is seeking out sugar. But once you deliberately omit sugar from the diet for a few weeks, the cravings die away. There's every possibility then that sugar-loving bacteria, thriving in the sugary environment, release chemicals that cause the human to seek out more sugar. Deliberately cutting sugars from the diet starves these bacteria out, causing the hormones and cravings to subside. Bowel bacteria are known to secrete both GABA and serotonin that are produced in the human body as well. So there's clearly a drive to manipulate our behavior. These substances get absorbed in the colon and cause motivation and elation. We like to think of ourselves as higher organisms, and bacteria and fungi as lower ones. But there are lots of instances of so-called lower organisms manipulating the behavior of higher ones. In answer to the question of why we developed a microbiome in the first place, it would be true to say that microbiomes carved out niches for themselves in many animals, including humans, and it may be that the microbiome caused the evolution of the colon as a means to house itself. If the microbiome did cause the development of the colon, how can we manipulate it to be the best it can be? To answer this, we have to make the assumption that the microbiome we evolved with is the best one. This would make logical sense. In any natural ecosystem, human interference that is unnatural nearly always leads to a deterioration. Nature knows best. Of course, if you want to find out what is the ideal microbiome, you have two options. You could take microbiomes from healthy-looking modern-day humans, and you could even test unhealthy groups alongside and compare one microbiome against the other. You can see which bacteria seem to be good and which seem to be bad. The trouble is, let's suppose that one bacterium, Firmicutes for example, comes out as always being present in healthy people and always absent in unhealthy people. Now, Firmicutes might well need another type of bacterium, or even dozens of types working together to do its good work. You won't know which these are, so you're no further forward. You could look at what our ancient hunter-gatherer groups had in their bowels. Unfortunately, we have absolutely no idea. Microbiomes don't fossilize, but most importantly, even if you found a creature trapped in ice like a woolly mammoth or an ancient human, the microbiome will, upon death, immediately change. The dead bowel wall will lose its competence, and any meat-eating bacteria will leach out into the surrounding body and begin the process of decomposition. So the proportions of the different bacteria we'd find would be skewed in favor of ones that cause dead meat to putrefy. Okay, so now how about modern-day hunter-gatherers, like the Hadza tribe in Tanzania? They have extremely diverse microbiomes and appear to be in robust health. Could we now take their bacteria, fungi, protozoa and worms, grow them and transplant them into our colons? No. In order to maintain their microbiome, you would need to continually eat their food and avoid the foods they avoid. You'd have to constantly expose yourself to the bacteria in their environment. All this is impossible in the modern world. What then can we do? Throughout the program, we've discussed the microbiome like it's one thing. And it is, but it's more like an individual forest than it is an individual organ. Each member of the forest fights for its own survival. Each occupies a unique niche, and this competition keeps the number of each species in a particular balance. If you take a live yogurt drink containing a few billion so-called good bacteria, all you do is temporarily tip the balance in favour of that one type of bacterium. As soon as you stop drinking that healthy live yogurt drink, the numbers quickly revert to suit whichever condition your colon is normally subject to. Plus, the so-called good bacterium from the yogurt cannot by itself make a good microbiome. Using again the analogy of the forest, the way to ensure a good balance is to put in whatever is going to encourage the greatest diversity. And that usually means food, which is why thinking about good and bad bacteria isn't a helpful concept. For example, in a forest, is a mongoose good? Yes, it has a role to play in the forest. How about a tiger? Dangerous, but yes. Without it, deer will proliferate and eat too much of the vegetation. How about rats? Well, so long as the rats are native to the forest, absolutely. A healthy and diverse microbiome contains a mixture of all kinds of bacteria, good, bad and ugly. There will also be viruses, fungi and protozoa, and maybe even a few worms. It's the diversity that matters, not whether you have one bacterium or another. As omnivores, we were designed to eat a variety of foods, including a lot of plant fibers, and if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan, a range of different meats too. The answer then to the question of how to develop a good microbiome is to encourage diversity by feeding the gut with as wide a range of plants as possible, and if you do eat meat, to try to vary the meats too. Busy modern lives make the consumption of a varied diet very difficult. Many people choose the following alternative. That is to use a blender to blend a variety of raw vegetable matter to get the maximum variety of fibers each day. Notice that juicing does not benefit the microbiome very much. It would prefer that you throw away the juice and instead eat the pulp. Knowing that sugars and alcohol and refined flour give rise to poorly functioning microbiomes, it's a good idea to minimize these, which is not easy. One way to compromise while helping the microbiome is to limit your sugars, alcohols and refined flours to the ones you enjoy most, and at the times of day that you'd enjoy most. By doing this, you'll tend to avoid the casual half-decent croissant. You'll only eat when you encounter a very, very good one, and you'll only eat it when you really know that you'll enjoy it, not on the run while catching a train. At times that you won't enjoy it, you'll save your quota for such times as you will. The same is true for sugary drinks and alcohol. Do you love the drink that's on offer? Fine, have it. Or are you just having one because you're at the bar and you feel the need to hold a glass of drink? Have a sparkling water instead and save the quota for another time. That pack of potato chips, is it really that good? If so, enjoy it. But if it isn't, then decline. Save your quota again for another time. Speaking of quota, the Venkat Files has a quota of likes we like to hit. So if you enjoyed this tour through the microbiome and found it informative, subscribe if you haven't already, and definitely like the channel. Interact in the comments and let us know what you do to help your microbiome. And in the meantime, we wish you well and look forward to welcoming you on another program.